Have you ever had one of those days where you technically did a lot, but somehow, when the day ends, you still feel like you did nothing? You answered messages, finished some work, cleaned your room, studied, exercised, or handled things you had been putting off. Yet when you finally sit down, a strange thought appears. I should have done more. That feeling is more common than you might think. And what makes it interesting is that the problem isn't always how much you accomplish. Sometimes, the real problem is how your brain measures accomplishment. Your mind doesn't experience your life like a perfectly organized progress bar. It constantly compares where you are now with where you think you should be. And when those two pictures don't match, you can feel behind even when you're actually moving forward. Imagine a simple stick figure standing at the bottom of a staircase. He looks upward and sees 10 steps above him. Instead of noticing the step beneath his feet, his attention immediately jumps toward the distance still remaining. He takes one step forward, looks up again, and sees 9 steps, then 8, then 7. But instead of feeling successful, he thinks, I'm still far away. This is one of the strange ways our minds experience progress. We often notice the gap between ourselves and an imagined destination more strongly than the distance we've already traveled. That's why someone can improve dramatically over a year and still feel dissatisfied with themselves. The brain is very good at detecting what is missing, but it isn't always equally good at appreciating what has changed. Think about learning a new skill. On the first day, everything feels difficult. After a few weeks, something that once required intense concentration becomes almost automatic. But because the activity now feels normal, you may stop recognizing the improvement. Your brain quietly changes the definition of what counts as success. Yesterday, completing the task was an achievement. Today, completing the same task feels ordinary. And when ordinary becomes the new normal, progress can become almost invisible. This is why personal growth can sometimes feel strangely disappointing. You expected growth to feel exciting. Instead, it often feels normal. You expected confidence to feel powerful. Instead, confidence may simply feel like being less afraid than you used to be. You expected discipline to feel heroic. Instead, discipline may look like quietly doing something even when you don't feel motivated. Real progress is often much less dramatic than the stories we tell ourselves about it. Picture another stick figure carrying a heavy backpack. At the beginning, the backpack is enormous. Every step is difficult. Over time, the figure becomes stronger. The backpack hasn't necessarily become lighter, but carrying it has become easier. The problem is that the figure may never notice his increased strength because he's focused entirely on the weight. That's something we do in everyday life. We judge our current difficulty without comparing it to our previous ability to handle that difficulty. A stressful situation that would have completely overwhelmed you 2 years ago might now be something you handle in an afternoon. But because you're focused on the fact that you're still stressed, you may completely overlook the fact that you've become stronger. Your brain can also create an imaginary version of yourself that is always ahead of you. Maybe it's the person you think you should already be. More successful, more confident, more productive, more disciplined, more social, more financially secure, more accomplished. This imaginary person becomes a silent measuring stick. And every time you compare yourself with that imagined version, the present version of you feels inadequate. The strange part is that this imaginary person doesn't even have to exist. You can spend years feeling behind someone who only exists inside your own expectations. Imagine a stick figure running on a road. Ahead of him is another stick figure carrying a sign that says, "The person you should be." Every time the first figure gets closer, the other figure moves farther away. There is no finish line. There is only comparison. This can create a psychological trap where achievement never produces lasting satisfaction because the target keeps changing. You finish one goal, and immediately another appears. You improve your body, then you want a better body. You earn more money, then the new amount becomes normal. You become more skilled, then you notice people who are even more skilled. You finally reach something you once desperately wanted, but instead of enjoying it, your brain quickly asks, what next? This doesn't mean ambition is bad. Ambition can be incredibly useful. The problem begins when progress becomes valuable only because it moves you closer to some future version of yourself. When that happens, the present moment becomes nothing more than a waiting room. You're always preparing to finally feel satisfied later. But later keeps moving. There's another reason people often underestimate their progress. We remember outcomes more easily than the effort required to create them. Think about something you can do today that used to be difficult. Maybe speaking in front of people, driving somewhere unfamiliar, exercising consistently, studying for an exam, using complicated software, or simply setting boundaries in a conversation. Today, you might do it without thinking. Because the struggle has disappeared, you may assume it was never that significant. But the absence of struggle doesn't mean the achievement was small. It can actually be evidence that you learned. A beginner notices every improvement because every improvement is obvious. An experienced person often notices mistakes because the basics have become invisible. That's why people sometimes look back at an old version of themselves and realize, almost unexpectedly, I was dealing with so much back then. The change didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened through hundreds of tiny adjustments that were too small to celebrate individually. One more page, one more workout, one difficult conversation, one mistake understood, one habit repeated, one uncomfortable situation survived. Human growth often hides inside repetition. And because repetition feels ordinary, we underestimate what it produces. Now imagine a stick figure standing beside a wall. On the wall are hundreds of tiny marks representing every small improvement he's made. But he isn't looking at the wall. He's staring at a huge blank space above it, thinking about how much more he needs to achieve. The lesson isn't that you should stop improving. It's that you should learn to recognize improvement while continuing to grow. There is a huge difference between saying, I'm not where I want to be, and saying, I've made no progress. The first statement can be honest. The second may simply be inaccurate. You can be unfinished and still be improving. You can have problems and still be doing better. You can feel uncertain and still be moving forward. You can want more from your life without believing that your current life has no value. And perhaps that's one of the healthiest ways to think about progress. Don't ask only, how far do I still have to go? Occasionally ask, what can I handle now that the old version of me couldn't? That question changes the direction of your attention. The staircase suddenly looks different. You stop staring only at the steps above you and notice the ones already beneath your feet. The stick figure looks back and realizes the road behind him is much longer than he remembered. He isn't finished. He isn't at the destination. But he isn't standing where he started either. And maybe that's the part your brain forgets when life gets busy. Progress doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like something becoming easier. Sometimes it looks like recovering faster. Sometimes it looks like reacting differently. Sometimes it looks like walking away from something you once couldn't leave. Sometimes it simply looks like trying again without making a big announcement about it. Your life doesn't need to feel dramatically different every day for you to be changing. Some of the biggest transformations happen quietly, underneath the surface, while your attention is focused somewhere else. So the next time you finish a difficult week and think, I haven't done enough, pause for a moment. Don't force yourself to feel proud. Don't pretend everything is perfect. Just look at the evidence. Compare yourself with the person you were, not only the person you imagine becoming. Because sometimes the reason you feel behind isn't that you're standing still. It's that you've become so focused on the distance ahead that you've forgotten to notice how far you've already come.